Salutations! White Mage is best known as Final Fantasy XIV's simple healer. While it's totally true that it's the most linear and straightforward, there are nonetheless some advanced nuances with its optimization in more difficult content, such as X-Trials, Savages, and Ultimates. My aim here is to organize some of those things into one hopefully easy to understand video and encourage novice White Mages to both think more deeply about their job and, hopefully, start tackling some of the fun endgame fights 14 has to offer. Now, I myself am not the world's best player by any measure, but I play a lot of endgame White Mage and do serviceably alright. I don't want to bog down our pace by explaining every minor game concept that comes up, so here's a glossary of important, universal terms you can refer back to at any time. Now, first, it's good to understand White Mage's role amongst the other healers. It does not have the busiest kit, the biggest mit, or the most raid utility, but it has high personal damage, strong burst healing, and an excellent toolset to learn endgame healing on. Very few of its abilities require setup or foreknowledge of a fight, and its wealth of recovery options can salvage mistakes at the drop of a hat. Next, let's get this out of the way. In any Final Fantasy XIV instance, be it a level 16 Sastasha run or the latest Ultimate, every single person is expected to deal damage. This includes healers, whose damage, or lack thereof, can very feasibly cause the slight difference between a clear or a failed DPS check. So, when it comes to optimizing White Mage, we also have to discuss damage. Unfortunately, it's pretty simple. In an optimal environment, an overwhelming majority of your GCDs will be glare, with your Dia at near 100% uptime. If nothing else is going on, you should be machine gunning glares as a default task, no exceptions. At the most basic level, it could be said that healer damage goes up as healer healing goes down. Dealing damage as a White Mage may not be mechanically difficult, but if you want to unlock the job's maximal potential, you need to really master your tools so people aren't dying while you spam glares. To wit, White Mage has two main healing ecosystems that need to be understood in their entirety if you want to find success. The first, and most important, are the Lily heals. Lilies are the backbone of White Mage's identity. You have the single target Solace and the raid-wide Rapture, and they are your top shelf S-rank heals. To understand why, let's look in depth at the almighty Blood Lily and Misery. Every time you use Solace or Rapture, they feed the Lily, and at 3 stacks, you can use Misery. At a superficial level, this hard-hitting 1240 potency nuke attack is equal to the 4 glares you gave up in opportunity cost by spending those 4 GCDs on the Lily heals and Misery itself. However, while the raw potencies may be equal, you are actually gaining some benefits over casting 4 plain glares. For one, neither the Lily heals nor Rapture itself cost any mana. Calculating just the cost of 4 glares and not any of the more expensive healing options you might have used for the party's health instead, you're saving a minimum of 1600 MP with the Lily combo. This is part of what gives White Mage its strong mana economy. Somewhat unintuitively, there are also potential damage gains. Yes, gains. 1240 in this case does not equal 1240, thanks to the almighty 2-minute damage meta and our Lord and Savior RNGesus. First of all, what's more likely? 4 individual casts each critting, or 1? Congratulations, you passed 2nd grade. It's 1. If your Misery crits, it's like having 4 individual glares crit for the price of 1, and you know where this is even more common? Inside raid buffs, where things like Dragoon's Battle Litany further boost your chances of cashing out on the Lily lottery. And speaking of raid buffs still, here's the other benefit. If you've prepped your Blood Lily by using your Afflatus heals outside of raid buffs, that is, while all of them were still on cooldown, then unleash the Lily inside of them, you have essentially teleported your 3 missed glares into raid buffs. On top of the MP efficiency and crit luck shenanigans, this is a strong incentive to avoid overcapping your Lily gauge by spending all 3 every minute and having a Blood Lily prepped every 60 seconds. If you're sitting on 2 stacks and your 3rd is about to tick, toss out a Lily heal and then use the free GCD window to weave other spells and/or reposition for a mechanic. In this sense, the Lily heals are also movement tools. Just be sure not to waste Lilies when you're not capped if healing will soon be needed, and avoid dumping Lilies into an already nourished Blood Lily, as that's just a complete waste. Moving on, our second ecosystem is your plain old GCD heals. This is actually a little less straightforward than the Lily stuff, and there's some pretty noob-trappy options here too. Our first major offender is Cure 1. This spell has been justifiably memed to death, but if you've missed the memo, don't use it. Its additional effect is terrible because MP probably isn't your top concern anyway if it's come down to hardcasting cures. Its heal value is also atrocious. A crit Cure 1 offers about the same healing as a normal Cure 2, which is itself a last resort over stronger options like Solace, Tetra, or even Benny. Cure 1 is the runner-up to the runner-up. It just isn't an efficient key press and should virtually never be touched in modern content. Our next few spells are the actually important ones here, and there's a bit more to them. The raid wides. Sit down, some numbers are coming your way. Medica 1 is in a weird place. It costs 900 MP for a 400 potency cure with a 15 yalm range. It competes in this slot with Cure 3, a pricier 1500 MP, 600 potency heal with a shorter 10 yalm range. In many scenarios, they both lose to Medica 2, which, if, rather unrealistically, it is allowed to tick for its full duration without overhealing, will be an initial 250 potency heal with a whopping 5 ticks of 150 on top, equaling 1000 total potency. However, with merely 2 ticks, it's past Medica 1 and matched Cure 3 with less MP invested and greater range. In order, Rapture and then Medica 2 are your priority heals, while Cure 3 and Medica 1 are far more situational. Medica 1 is usually only used when Cure 3's smaller range will pose a problem. One more quick advantage with Cure 3, however, is that while both Medicas and Rapture cast out directly from your character, Cure 3 can technically be cast on a different target, and that has quite a decent range to it. If a mechanic has separated you from the party and they need healing, targeting one of them with Cure 3 offers a kind of unique solution. Long term though, you should be looking to cut as many non-Lily heals as you can, since every heal expended is lost potential in terms of damage. As we discussed, Lilies refund, with interest, your invested GCDs. Non-Lily heals do not. You may not be able to prune every single one of them, especially on more difficult fights with high instances of raid damage, but look to cut wastefulness wherever you can. I also heavily recommend starting with too many heals and scaling back as your group gets more comfortable, rather than greeting right from the start. You want to be progging mechanics when you're fresh to a fight, not heal checks. But if the damage is the same, how am I going to cut non-Lily heals? What a suspiciously convenient question. Now we can segue to the next part of this video, understanding mitigation. Just like everyone is expected to deal damage in 14, everyone is expected to contribute to Mit too, even selfish DPS jobs like BLM or SAM, and yes, of course, White Mage. Despite being a so-called pure healer, we do have some pretty substantial OGCD tools that allow us to reduce incoming damage and/or improve our other heals. Managing these resources is how you can comfortably compress the party's damage and make the healing manageable. However, many of them are rather more complicated than meets the eye, so let's address those. We'll start with the big dog, Temperance, a job-defining backbone tool. Temp, or Wings as it's sometimes called, offers the best of both worlds, party mitigation and a healing boost. So long as someone is within 30 yalms of you, they'll receive a 10% damage reduction. If someone is outside of this range when you cast it and then moves within it, they'll gain the effect. Likewise, if they were in it but walk out, they lose it. Simple. Less simple is this troublesome wording. Let's compare it to another very good White Mage tool, Asylum, a ground-placed dome that offers a renew to everyone inside it and increases HP recovery via healing actions. Similar effect, different wording. Why? Because unfortunately, they do different things. The effect on Temperance only affects your GCD heals. It will make things like your Lilies and your GCD raid wides, say Cure 3, heal for more, but not an OGCD like Tetra. The effect on Asylum, however, affects almost everything, including other people's OGCDs too. If, say, a warrior used their equilibrium while standing in your Asylum, it would be buffed. In most cases, your co-healer will be the one who most takes advantage of this, as all their normal heals will of course benefit from Asylum's effect too. Now, looping back to the damage reduction part of Temp, we have to cover another very important, but perhaps not totally obvious, defensive interaction, snapshotting. Just before a boss's attack finishes, the server takes a picture of your party's active mitigations and calculates the proper amount of damage your party is taking. Many bosses in Endwalker deal raid-wide damage, then follow it up with a bleed effect. In fact, almost every tank buster in Abyssos has a follow-up bleed. If you're slow on the draw and apply your mitigation, like Wings, after these bleeds are applied, the boss will essentially tell you to go f yourself. If your mitigation is not applied before the bleed, it will never be. Simple as that. This is important for Wings, but it's really important for Aquaveil, an outstanding tool that, used poorly, will feel useless, but used well will be a nice part of your kit. You see, while this snapshot system can screw you over, it can also be exploited for gain. For example, if you Aquaveil a target that's about to take a 12-second bleed, then even though Veil itself only lasts 8 seconds, you will Mit the whole 12 seconds of that bleed. This last one is not Mit as such, but it's a powerful spell that needs to be understood. Liturgy of the Bell. It's important to read closely here and understand that for the healing stacks on the bell to proc, you have to take damage. Don't throw this down when you personally aren't going to take any hits, otherwise it'll just be a very pretty but very useless flower. Okay, Our final section is, as promised, a rather large and rather broad collection of best practices and guidelines for our kit that I've tried to organize into rough categories. To start with damage, Holy is a gain on 3+ targets if you're above level 72 and have Glare, but it's a gain on 2+ targets if you're below that and have Stone instead. Second, a size is not really a healing tool, it's a damage and MP tool, and one of our best. You should use it off cooldown in 99% of cases, the 1% being reserved for individual fight optimizations totally outside the scope of this video. Third, Presence of Mind is our personal 2-minute damage buff and should be used within every raid buff window. Because it reduces our recast time, or GCD, it's a damage steroid and should be used to machine gun as many glares as possible. Lastly, it's never worth it to refresh your dot early just to get it under raid buffs. Math simply doesn't work out. You should shoot to refresh Dia when it has 1 or 2 seconds left in its duration and try not to let it fall off too often. It's a significant portion of our damage. Now, for healing, Tetra is a great tool if someone takes unexpected damage, but it can also be used to just spot heal the tanks as needed. Next, do not sleep on Plenary Indulgence. This is a major part of our healing effectiveness as it's basically a steroid for our most important tools. You press it first, giving everybody the Confession buff. When you then use any of your AoE GCD heals, including, importantly, Rapture, Confession procs a bonus 200 potency heal on top, making Rapture a 600 potency nuke. Note that Confession is not consumed by this, and will proc every time you cast into it for the 10 seconds that it's up, which in effect gives you about 3 procs. Technically 4 if you can also slip in a non-Lily GCD heal. Moving on, Divine Benisons should be thrown onto tanks who are either about to take a tank buster or otherwise get smacked around by the boss. Note that there is a pretty considerable delay in the shield actually coming out, so you'll want to be slightly predictive. If you throw the shield out when the boss is mid-swing, you're too late. And to conclude the healing bits, Benediction. It can just be held for reactive saves like topping someone who's about to die or who has just been rezzed, but importantly, it can also be used in a more structured sense on warriors, gunbreakers, and dark knights who have used their invulns, as all 3 come with some sort of low health interaction. It used to be far more important for dark knights, but the reworked Living Dead changed that. Now, for mana management, Lucid Dreaming is critical to our MP economy, especially on higher spell speed builds. So long as you're at or around 8000 MP when you pop it, you won't overcap if you just continue to cast. Finally, do not waste Thin Air. Despite us having 2 stacks, it should be reserved for pricey spells like Cure 3 or, especially, Raise. Because deaths can happen suddenly, especially during prog, you should always aim to have at least 1 Thin Air available. I encourage any and all aspiring or intermediate White Mage watching this to try their hand at endgame content. You do not need 7 close friends to enjoy yourself. I'm not the most social person, but I've joined Total Stranger Statics for both this past raid tier and currently another group for an ultimate. Thanks to recruiting discords like FF14 Recruiter, it is very easy to find and play with like-minded people. At the end of the day, it's all just fun. You don't have to be the best in the world, but the info here will certainly make you better. Enjoy the game, and if you don't subscribe, I will rescue you off the arena.